The ceasefire is dead. While the ink on the U.S.-Iran truce was still drying, while diplomats in Islamabad were still counting down the days on what was supposed to be a 2-week pause, Israel launched its heaviest wave of strikes on Lebanon since the ceasefire began. Bint Jbeil, Nabateh, Qana, Marub, Ghazieh, the Beirut southern suburbs, the Bekaa Valley, all of them hit in rolling waves of airstrikes and ground operations on April 15, 2026, and Hezbollah answered. Between 26 and 40 rockets, mortars, anti-tank guided missiles and drones launched at northern Israel, Kiryat Shmona, Safed, Shlomi, Carmiel, Misgav Am, simultaneously. 5 Israeli cities under fire at the same time. On the same day that U.S. diplomats were telling the press that peace talks could resume within days. The ceasefire is dead, and the reason it died, the specific decision that broke it, is not the story that any Western outlet is leading with today. To understand why the ceasefire collapse on April 15th is Iran's strategic validation and not its defeat, you have to understand what the ceasefire was supposed to protect and what Israel chose to do inside it. The U.S.-Iran ceasefire, announced after weeks of escalation, explicitly covered direct Iranian strikes on Israeli and U.S. targets. It did not explicitly cover Lebanon. That carve-out, the decision to leave the Lebanon theater outside the truce framework, was the pressure point that Iran flagged from the first day. Iranian military sources described Israeli strikes on Lebanon as a grave violation of the spirit of the deal. They issued public warnings that they were identifying targets for possible response if the strikes continued. Israel continued. On April 14th and 15, Israeli forces hit Nabateh, Qana, Marub, Ghazieh, Sadiat, Bint Jbeil, the Beirut southern suburbs, and the Bekaa Valley in rolling waves. They targeted command centers, rocket launchers, and a hospital compound in Bint Jbeil, bridges over the Litani River. The cumulative Lebanese death toll since March 2nd reached 2,055 confirmed killed. 13 more died in the Nabateh and Ghazieh area on April 15th alone. 5 more in Qana, 6 in Marub, and through all of it, Iran held. No missiles launched, no direct Iranian response. That restraint is not weakness. It's the most powerful strategic signal Iran has sent in this entire conflict. And what Hezbollah did, with 26 to 40 projectiles across 5 Israeli cities while Iran held back, is the part of this story that nobody is reporting correctly. The timeline of April 14th and 15 does not begin with Hezbollah rockets. It begins with Israeli strikes. Israeli Air Force and ground forces open the rolling bombardment across southern Lebanon and the Beirut suburbs, Bint Jbeil first, then Nabateh, then Qana, where memories of 1996 and 2006 are still in the walls of every building that survived. Marub, Ghazieh, Sadiat, the Bekaa Valley. One wave after another in what the BBC's own coverage described as the heaviest fighting since the ceasefire announcement. A hospital compound in Bint Jbeil takes a direct hit. Bridges over the Litani River, civilian infrastructure that controls the movement of people and goods between North and South Lebanon, are targeted. 13 people die in Nabateh and Ghazieh before the morning is over. 5 in Qana, 6 in Marub. Then, and only then, Hezbollah responds. Between 26 and 40 rockets, mortars, anti-tank guided missiles and drones launched toward northern Israel. Kiryat Shmona, Safed, Shlomi, Carmiel, Misgav Am, 5 communities under simultaneous fire. Not one Israeli community, 5, across a wide arc of the north, activated at the same time in a coordinated response pattern that demonstrates Hezbollah's command and communication architecture is still functional after 45 days of Israeli strikes. That last point matters. The IDF has struck approximately 150 Hezbollah targets per day for weeks. They have hit launch sites, command centers, weapons depots, communication nodes, and on April 15th, Hezbollah still managed a synchronized multi-vector response across 5 simultaneous target coordinates. The degradation is real. The capability is still there. The reason Iran chose to warn loudly and hold back militarily on April 15th is this: the warning itself is the weapon. Iranian military sources stated publicly that armed forces are identifying targets for a possible response if Israeli-Lebanon strikes continue. That statement, identifying targets, is not rhetoric. It is a doctrinal signal. In IRGC communication doctrine, publicly naming the target identification phase is the step before the strike authorization phase. The sequence has a logic that analysts who follow Iranian military communication recognize immediately. Iran is not holding back because it cannot respond. It is holding back because the threat of response is more valuable, right now, than the response itself. The U.S. naval blockade is genuine and formidable. 15-plus warships, 10,000 personnel. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group, mine-clearing operations now confirmed in the Strait of Hormuz, a Malta-flagged VLCC that transited as the first tanker since the blockade began. All of that is real and verified by CENTCOM, Reuters, and CBS News. But the blockade does not neutralize Iran's ballistic missile arsenal. It does not neutralize Hezbollah's remaining multi-vector launch capability. And it does not neutralize the political cost for the United States of a second Israeli ceasefire violation in a final week of truce that U.S. diplomats are simultaneously trying to extend through Pakistan. Trump told the press the war is close to over. Vance cited Iranian refusal of terms, while Israel was bombing Quetta. That contradiction, the peace talk optimism running alongside the deadliest Lebanese strikes since the ceasefire, is the exact gap that Iran's warning is designed to exploit. April 15th produced one of the highest single-day civilian casualty tallies in Lebanon since the conflict began. 13 killed in the Nabateh and Ghazieh area, 5 in Quetta, 6 in Marub. The cumulative count since March 2nd, confirmed by the Lebanese Health Ministry and cross-referenced by the BBC, Al Jazeera, and The Guardian, reached 2,055 killed and thousands wounded. A hospital compound in Bint Jbeil was struck. Bridges over the Litani River were targeted, and Hezbollah kept firing. 26 to 40 projectiles across Kiryat Shmona, Saft, Shlomi, Carmiel, and Misgav Am, simultaneous, coordinated, covering a wide geographic arc of northern Israel in a response that lasted hours. Israel's Iron Dome and David's Sling intercepted significant numbers, but interception is not free. Each battery consumes munitions that have production timelines measured in months, not hours. In the village of Marub, in the hills above the southern Lebanese coastline, a small farming community of stone houses and olive groves that sits close enough to the Israeli border to hear the artillery before the missiles arrive, a Lebanese nurse in her late 30s who has been working the overnight shift at the local clinic for 6 consecutive nights describes to Reuters correspondents what the April 15th wave sounded like. She says the first impact came from the south. She says the second came from a different direction, and she couldn't identify it before the third landed. She says she stopped trying to identify directions 2 weeks ago. She says she just counts the patients now. She just counts the patients now. And what that nurse in Marub is counting: 2,055 cumulative dead, 13 more that morning, the hospital compound in Bint Jbeil hit, the bridges over the Litani cut, is the balance of a ceasefire that Israel is conducting as if it never existed. The anti-tank guided missile, the ATGM, in Hezbollah's April 15th barrage is the detail that tells you where this conflict is going next. Let that sit for a moment. Hezbollah has used ATGMs throughout this conflict, but their presence in a barrage that also includes rockets, mortars, and drones on April 15th is not incidental. The ATGM is a precision system. It requires a trained operator, a stable firing position, line of sight or guidance channel lock, and deliberate targeting. It is not a weapon you fire in panic. It is a weapon you fire when you have identified a specific target and you have the command structure intact to authorize the shot. The fact that Hezbollah is firing ATGMs on April 15th after 45 days of Israeli strikes designed to eliminate exactly those kinds of coordinated, precision-capable firing teams is the most significant battlefield signal of the day. It means the Yahalom Special Operations Forces that the IDF has been targeting in the Bint Jbeil area have not eliminated the ATGM-equipped units. It means the command and communication infrastructure that authorizes those shots is still functioning, and it means that Hezbollah's response to the April 15th escalation was not a desperation salvo. It was a calibrated demonstration, precisely the type of response that sources familiar with Hezbollah operational doctrine confirm is designed to signal, we are degraded but not broken, and we are showing you specifically which capability we still have. The rockets hit 5 cities. The ATGM told the story. On April 15th, every capital that matters processed the same images, smoke over Nabateh, rockets over Kiryat Shmona, and reached different conclusions about what comes next. In Washington, the messaging was jarring. Trump declared the war close to over. Vance blamed Iranian refusal of terms for the Islamabad collapse, and simultaneously, U.S. warships were conducting mine-clearing operations in the Strait of Hormuz while Israel bombed Qana. Those 3 things happened in the same 24-hour news cycle. None of the administration's public statements addressed the contradiction. In Islamabad, Pakistan's army chief traveled to Tehran to revive the diplomatic process after the Vance-led talks collapsed. That visit, a third-party mediator traveling to the Iranian capital during an active Israeli escalation in Lebanon, is the signal that the ceasefire is not fully dead yet, but it is on life support. In Beirut, anger. Al Jazeera's coverage led with the phrase, "Anger in Lebanon as Israel launches deadly strikes despite diplomatic drive." That is not an editorial framing. That is the street. Every tanker operator in the Gulf did the same calculation on April 15th that they've been doing since the blockade began. The Malta-flagged VLCC transited the strait, the first confirmed transit since enforcement began. One ship, in a strait that normally handles 20% of the world's traded oil. And Ghazieh, where the hospital at Nasser is treating patients without adequate spare parts, where 72,000 Palestinians have died since October 2023, where the origin of every one of these conflicts has been waiting for someone to address it, keeps waiting. Lebanon thought there was a ceasefire, then Israel hit Qana. Again. That sentence carries weight that you cannot measure in oil prices or ship tracking data. Qana, 1996, 106 civilians killed in a UN compound. Qana, 2006, 28 more, mostly children, in an airstrike that briefly stopped a war. Qana, April 15, 2026, 5 dead in a fresh wave during a ceasefire that the United States is simultaneously trying to extend. Some places carry their history in their names. Qana is one of them. In the Sabra neighborhood of West Beirut, a dense residential district that borders the area where thousands of Palestinians and Lebanese have lived in the shadow of the 1982 massacre for more than 40 years, where the smell of the sea mixes with the sound of generator engines that run day and night because the grid never came back. A Palestinian man in his 60s who was born in this neighborhood describes to Al Jazeera correspondents what he felt when he heard that Qana had been struck again. He says he didn't feel surprised. He says that is the most honest thing he can tell anyone. He says he stopped feeling surprised about Qana in 1996. He says what he feels now is something that doesn't have a word in Arabic or English, beyond grief, past anger, somewhere on the other side of both. From Indonesia to Poland, from Nigeria to Brazil, from Vietnam to Turkey, from Malaysia to South Africa, hundreds of millions of people watched April 15th and felt the weight of a ceasefire that lasted until it became inconvenient for the side that has always decided when ceasefires end. The world has seen enough of Qana being bombed while diplomats talk about peace, enough of 2,055 dead in Lebanon being counted while Washington announces the war is close to over, enough of hospital compounds in Bint Jbeil being struck during a truce that was supposed to protect civilians. Enough. The resistance is still standing. The rockets still fly. And the ceasefire that was supposed to end this is the latest casualty of a conflict that has never followed the rules written for it. 3 questions. No public answers, each one capable of changing the map before the weekend. First, Iran's red line. Iranian military sources said publicly they are identifying targets for a possible response if Israeli-Lebanon strikes continue. The strikes continued on April 15th. The ceasefire is in its final week. Pakistan's army chief went to Tehran to try to revive the talks. The question that nobody has answered publicly is whether Iran's target identification phase has already moved to authorization, and whether the Pakistan visit is the last diplomatic circuit breaker before that authorization becomes in order. Second, Hezbollah's ceiling. 45 days of 150 target-per-day Israeli strikes, and on April 15th, Hezbollah still fired ATGMs, still coordinated across 5 simultaneous locations, still demonstrated functional command architecture. The IDF's stated objective was to reduce Hezbollah's capacity to the point of operational collapse. That threshold has not been crossed. How close is it? Nobody has published that number. Third, the final week of the ceasefire. The 2-week truce is in its closing days. If it expires without renewal, if Pakistan's mediation fails and Iran does not extend, then whatever restraint has held the direct Iran-Israel exchange back ends on a timer that is already running. What we know today, Qana was bombed. Hezbollah answered, the ceasefire is barely breathing. What nobody knows, whether Iran's warning becomes action before the truce expires. What is certain, the next 72 hours decide whether this conflict enters its next phase or finds a way back from the edge. We will be here either way. Make sure you are too.